and have no repercussions. This, if you're going to give them time, you should be able to take it away. So that's what this bill does, is it says, Commissioner, if you need to, you can take away some of these credits as well, and let there be a better balance. So that's what this bill does. Again, I am in support of the Minnesota Rehabilitation Investment Act as a concept, but there are some things in it that just do not work for me, and this is the biggest thing that does not work for me. So that is why I'm back in your committee, as much as I'd like to be on the committee, but I would love to see that change, to give that power back to the commissioner to say, nope, if something heinous happens, if a rule is continually being broken, then these credits can be taken away. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Eric. Please have your testifier state their name for the record and begin.
Chair Novotny and committee members, I'm David Zimmer, Public Safety Policy Fellow with Center of the American Experiment. I appear today in support of House File 963, which seeks to improve public safety by removing the non-revocable status of the Earned Incentive Release Credit. We should all want prison inmates to participate in programming. It's in our collective best interest that prison inmates leave prison better than when they went in. But establishing a non-revocable clause in the Earned Incentive Release Program undermines the key to the whole program, incentive. Incentive to behave and incentive to engage in programming. Referring to the DOC's own 2024 annual report, we can assess how inmates are behaving and engaging in programming currently. In 2024, there were some 6,700 inmates, 81% of the total inmate population, with a diagnosed substance abuse disorder. Yet just 25% of those inmates engaged in substance abuse treatment. And of those who did, 21% failed to successfully complete the treatment. Also in 2024, there were 923 inmates with a diagnosed serious and persistent mental illness. The DOC engaged with these inmates nearly 2,100 times in an effort to complete release and reintegration planning, yet were able to complete just 227 release plans. In 2024, inmate on staff assaults causing significant harm increased by 80% over 2023. Inmate on inmate assaults causing significant harm increased by 137%. The prison system had its first homicide of an inmate in 4 years. Possession of drugs increased by 44%, and possession of escape materials increased by 190%. I respectfully suggest that the level of disorder and programmatic failure is not the environment to insert a non-revocable earned incentive release clause. Such a clause would simply play into the disorder at hand. My strong preference, and it differs from Representative Rarick, but my strong preference would be a full repeal of the Rehabilitation and Reinvestment Act. However, removing the non-revocable clause in the Earned Incentive Release Credit Program represents a step in the right direction, and I urge a yes vote for House File 963.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. There's one more testifier signed up, David Bonneke. I'm sorry, what?
For the other MRA.
All right, thank you. You were down for both. With no other testifiers, does anyone have any questions for Chair Rarick or her testifiers? Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Representative Chair Rarick, for bringing this bill forward. So I just want to talk a little bit about. We have toured corrections facilities before. I think MRA is a really great thing that we have going forward and how we are handling corrections in the state of Minnesota. But you have something I see as really problematic in your bill here in the line 1.14, where the person violates rules of the facility, which can be extraordinarily subjective, can have extremely high amount of problems with that, and can basically nullify the entire program based on one person's thoughts and how they're interpreting and utilizing the rules of the facility. So how does this square with how MRA is intended to work, that you support it, and how would that actually work in the facility just by having rules of the facility? Because we know that in Shakopee, for example, that if folks touch each other, that could be interpreted as violation of the rules and that kind of thing. And so that seems like a very difficult way to push this forward.
Chair Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Tabke. So my intent of this, and I believe that's the way it is written, and we can ask nonpartisan to make sure that it is written as I intended, is that this is the ability of the commissioner to make that decision. And so if it rises to the level, I'm not saying like any rule breaking, because obviously part of treatment, part of moving someone in a different direction in their life is allowing them to fail, learning from that. That would not be my intention. So my intention is that if it is pervasive and continues and, you know, it needs to be addressed, then this is another tool that the commissioner would have to take away some of the earned credits. But I don't, the way you described it is not how I intended the legislation to bear out at all, because obviously part of rehabilitation is making mistakes, learning from your mistakes. You know, I've been fortunate in my 13 years here of touring every single state prison, most of them multiple times, except for Togo. I have yet to get up to the Canadian border. But in so doing, have actually sat in on classes and their treatment. I was allowed to do that. So it is a part of the process of the rehabilitation to make mistakes and to break the rules and then get corrected and then make a different decision next time. That is something that they talk about all the time. So that is not my intention whatsoever. And if, you know, if that is not clear in the language, we certainly can make that adjustment. But my intention is that the commissioner would have the ability and the discretion to be able to revoke those credits if need be, because he needs a tool in the toolbox.
Representative Tabke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that answer. It doesn't read that way to me, but I'd like to hear from nonpartisan staff as to if this is intended as written to be at the commissioner's discretion, or if this is just the way the statute would be written.
Mr. Debo.
Mr. Chair and members, I think the language is drafted broadly to give the commissioner a fair amount of discretion how to implement the policy.
Mr. Tabke. Representative Tabke.
I'll respond to anything, but thank you, Mr. Chair. That ends my questions.
Anyone else? Representative Feist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to propose some language that might get at your intentions. Perhaps we could change it to say, earned incentive release credits are revocable if the person engages in severe and persistent violations of the rules of the facility.
Representative Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. I would like for the commissioner to have that discretion. He's actually here, and I realize that he may not be our commissioner forever. We should have that consideration also, but I would trust him to know where's the line. I don't know that we want to be as prescriptive as that. Maybe we do, but I'll take that in consideration. This is being laid over, so we can have that conversation a little bit more afterwards. But, you know, I stated my intent, which is I understand fully that when you're on a path of changing your life, you make mistakes along that path. I fully acknowledge that. I don't want anything to be punitive for that as you're starting to make life changes, but this is for, like you had stated, more severe, persistent. They've gone a different direction, and it needs to be readjusted. And this is just another tool for the commissioner to help that readjustment to turn the ship a little bit.
Chair Rarick, I see, as you mentioned, we do have Commissioner Snell here. Commissioner Snell, I would be curious about if you feel the language is sufficient and if you have any opinions on the bill. Representative Schnell, or Commissioner Schnell, please state your full name and begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. Paul Schnell, the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Corrections. I first of all want to just say I really appreciate the bill. I think one of the things that we did was we have addressed this in the planning process when MRA was passed in 2023. It really gave the Department of Corrections broad latitude in terms of the creation and development of policies governing MRA. Well, the legislature created the framework around how MRA should work. It was the agency that would develop kind of what they would earn, how much credit they would earn for particular activities, and when those credits would be applied. And so the way this has been addressed right now within the department is that we have established in the initial policy how credits could be earned. But then the way we've addressed the very concern that this bill seeks to address, I believe, is that we don't apply those credits until they near the end of the term of their confinement or their readiness, or their eligibility date in accordance with MRA. So in effect, what we do, because one of the considerations is behavior within in the facilities, we don't apply anything until we make that determination. And that generally is about 6 months prior to the person's eligibility to be released. And that just allows us the ability to assess and manage any kind of behavior that we see in the facility. So we have done this by policy. This effectively, I think, addresses this a bit more specifically and explicitly in statute as it sits today.
Thank you, Commissioner Snell. Representative Kieran, I know that you were next on the list, but is your question for Commissioner? Oh, then go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question, I have a couple questions for Commissioner Snell. So I know first assaults on peace officers, correction officers are awful. And just want to say that up front. But I do have a question for the Commissioner. Would the person who murdered Officer Gom be eligible for this program?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative, no, they would not, because he was in prison for a first-degree murder, and therefore would have been ineligible for participation in this, number one. Number two, even if he were not convicted of that crime, the conduct itself would have made him ineligible because we would have determined when any credits that may have been earned would be granted while during the term of that incarceration.
Representative Kern.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that clarification. And so it sounds like then the current policy wouldn't allow for someone in that position to be eligible. So can folks who are incarcerated commit crimes without any consequences regarding early release?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative, no, I mean, I think right now, the way the policy is crafted, certainly we would want people held accountable, and if it's a crime for which prosecution would be warranted or worthwhile, we would want to pursue that. Second of all, again, by policy, and this would simply further codify that, by policy, we would not grant any early release based upon that conduct.
Thank you.
Done? Yeah. Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Chair Novotny. Thank you, Commissioner Snell and Representative Rarick. My question to you, Commissioner Snell, is the program up and running?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative Whitty, the program that we just published the policy here at the end of January, and we are beginning kind of a slow implementation of some of the retroactive review. So to date, no one has been released in accordance with MRA. The policy is just being implemented as we speak.
Representative Whitty.
Thank you. And so we haven't implemented anything yet, and so we don't know how this is going to go. And I will say, I appreciate providing you more tools. I think that's the end result. We want people to transition and be successful. And I saw this as a very positive, and actually when some of the, your officers have been through, they talk about the sentence to serve and how that is a really good deterrent because they want to stay on that program so they can go out there. And that's why I think having this tool could be very helpful. I think it will hopefully make your program even more successful. But I trust that obviously you're having those conversations with your officers and that. So I just see this as a possible good tool to achieve a good goal. Thank you.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, I was just wondering, how do we teach incarcerated people about accountability and responsibility if we allow early release despite reporting poor behavior?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative Schwartz, I think the policy as it's established would not allow somebody who is engaging in ongoing misconduct to earn early release. One of the things that MRA was fundamentally focused on was the core requirement that people had to earn early release, an emphasis on earn. And so while they're in that custody setting, their behavior matters. And so we don't provide them, grant them any credit until they get near the end of that eligibility for release. So nobody is, they are going to be held accountable, and they would not earn early release if their behavior was such that it was unacceptable. And it would be contrary to the whole notion of what the legislature intended, was that people earn early release.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Lead Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Rarick. And I first want to just say thank you for saying that you support MRRA as a concept. I think rehabilitation is one of the core functions of our Department of Corrections, and we've talked about this before, but I think in Oklahoma, they've been doing some innovative things around rehabilitation in both red states and blue states, and I heard them say, we call it Department of Corrections, but we're actually not doing much to correct behavior. And so I really appreciate that you have indicated in theory and concept that you support that. That's really important. And also makes us safer, because at the end of the day, people are going to get out of prison, and we want to make sure that they have the tools they need to be successful when they get out. I do have a question for the commissioner around some of the statistics we heard about treatments, substance use disorder, and other treatments that maybe didn't go so well while folks were incarcerated. And I would like to hear from your perspective how you think MRRA would be different from those.
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I would say that really one of the core objectives of MROA was to incent people to participate in these programs. And we heard this loud and clear from people who are incarcerated. Just to give an example, and I think this speaks a little bit to what Representative Whitty's question was. As we start to do the implementation work around MRA, we're looking at Shakopee and Moose Lake as our initial test sites, looking at a low-risk population of people and beginning to apply all of the policy framework that literally hundreds of both DOC staff and treatment staff and county probation staff have been involved in the development of this policy. And one of the things that we're seeing, and again, it's anecdotal at this stage because this is all very new, but the number of people who are seeking and actively pursuing programming at Moose Lake, for instance, has gone up dramatically. The number of people the number of behavior incidents inside that facility, staff have noted that they're gone down dramatically. People are paying attention because this matters. And I think what we want to do is make sure that they participate in the programs and they demonstrate the kinds of change in that environment in order for us to make an assessment about the applicability of that behavior change inside the facility to the community. And that's really the goal in the long haul here. And so I do believe that as MRA begins to be implemented and as we begin to look at retroactive review and apply these policies, we're going to see fundamental shifts and changes and desires for people to participate in these programs, which really is central to the state's public safety objective.
Lead Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'll just say, based on what I've heard you talk about, how the credits aren't really applied until the end of confinement based on the policy, and that some of the behaviors that sound like you're most concerned about, Representative Rarick, with this bill, as far as people who are persistently violating rules or committing other crimes, it sounds like that's sort of worked into the policy. And I certainly understand sometimes we need to put it in statute too. And I think it would be really helpful if you could take a look at the policy and see if there are aspects of it that you would like to put into statute, as opposed to doing it this way. Maybe the two can work together somehow. Thank you.
Thank you, Lead Moeller. We had one question, Representative Duran.
Thank you, Chair. This one's for the Commissioner. Do you like the language in the bill?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I think what this does is it reflects in many cases our policy. And so the policy itself addresses that. I think it is, literally, it would indicate that a person violates rules, then it's revocable. But I think, we do have the ability to manage this right now through the policy. This simply, as I mentioned earlier, codifies what's in that policy.
Representative Duran.
So you do like the language in the bill?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Snell.
Representative, the policymakers are the people in this room. It is my role to carry out those policies. And when the legislature passed the MRA bill in 2023, they granted the agency and our partners, along with a whole host of others, to provide input into the policy. We've done that. As I said earlier, what this language does is codify what's in the policy. It's whether I like it or not, we are here to fulfill the direction of policymakers.
Chair Rarick, closing statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, and that's what I was going to say is what I believe we're doing here is actually codifying what has been developed as the policy. And as you know, statute will live longer than the policy. Policies can come and go and change and morph and all that sort of thing. But this makes it explicitly clear that we, the legislature, think that it's also important to take away credit if you've got persistent rule breaking or other things that would warrant it. So this literally codifies what your policy that you've developed over quite some time, months, if not years. I know that you've been working on this for quite some time, long before 2023. Again, I'm supportive of the concept. I'm supportive of the act. I just want this extra piece explicitly in statute so it will withstand, if we don't have Commissioner Schell and we've got a different administration and they have a different set of policies and they have a different approach to this, then we, the legislature, have still put into statute, this is what we want. This is what we expect. And so, Mr. Chair, that is what this bill does, and that my hope is that this committee will put it into your omnibus or, once you get the fiscal note, be able to pass it out. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for your time today.
Thank you, Chair Rarick. With that, House File 963 is laid over. Thank you, Chair Rarick. Next bill on the agenda is 533. Chair Bliss, please come to the testifier table with your testifiers. Chair Bliss, we have not received a fiscal note yet on this bill, so we'll be laying the bill over today. Please explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Committee. In 2023, the DFL Public Safety Omnibus included the MRRA, the Minnesota Rehabilitation and Reinvestment Act. And it allows the Department of Corrections to release prison inmates after serving only half of the incarceration if the inmate reaches certain benchmarks. In addition, the offender can also shave time off supervision while on condition of release from prison. While our members didn't support the MRA in large numbers, it was first proposed in 2021, and we didn't support that one either, but that one at least had some carve-outs for violent crimes. And that's what this bill is intended to do. It's intended to make sure that certain violent crimes are not eligible for early release. There includes first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder, use of deadly force against a peace officer, prosecutor, judge, or correction officer, first-degree assault, first-degree criminal sexual assault, second-degree criminal sexual conduct, third-degree criminal sexual conduct if the crime was committed with force or violence, dangerous sex offenders where the court specifies a minimum term, crimes for the benefit of a gang where the offender is not eligible for release until serving the full term of the sentence, first and second degree controlled substance crimes where the offender is not eligible for release until serving the full sentence. House File 533 makes these and other violent predatory crimes ineligible. And, you know, you look at the crimes that are on there, and I've got some of the statutes printed out for some of these, and I just want to read a couple of them. Murder, cause of death of a human being while committing and attempting committing sexual conduct, cause of death of a peace officer, presiding judge, cause of death of a minor while committing child abuse. So that's your first-degree murder convictions. Criminal sexual conduct in the first degree, the actor is armed with a dangerous weapon. Actor knew or has reason to know the complaint is mentally impaired or mentally incapacitated or physically helpless. The actor is aided and abetted by one or more accomplices with the meaning of section 609.05. Dangerous sex offenders, these are people that have tortured the complainant, intentionally inflicted great bodily harm, intentionally mutilated, and exposed the complainant to extreme inhumane conditions. These are just some of the descriptions of the violent crimes that are currently available for early release on this, the current MRA. And my bill simply carves out the violent crimes and makes those not eligible. Thank you.
I believe you have a testifier. Mr. Zimmer, please state your full name and begin your testifier.
Chair Novotny and committee members, again, I'm David Zimmer, Public Safety Policy Fellow with Center of the American Experiment. I appear today in support of House File 533, which seeks to improve public safety by expanding the list of crimes to be excluded from the Earned Incentive Release Credit in prison. This credit system was a key element of the 2023 Minnesota Rehabilitation and Reinvestment Act, MRRA. Historically, a prison inmate in Minnesota served the time he or she was sentenced to. In 1980, Minnesota adopted a good time system as an incentive for good behavior. It shortened an inmate's imprisonment by 1 day for every 2 days they followed the rules and participated in programming. In 1993, Minnesota did away with the good time system and simply gave good time credit to all inmates, regardless of whether or not they participated in programming. Then in 2023, rather than reinstate the good time incentive and maintain the longstanding 1/3 reduction in time served, the legislature created an earned incentive release credit, which effectively increased the reduction time served from 33% up to 50%. As I said earlier, we should all want prison inmates to participate in programming. It's in our collective best interest that prison inmates come out of prison better than they entered it. But a 50% reduction in imprisonment time is excessive, and it adds to the ever-expanding disrespect and disregard so many criminal offenders have for the soft on crime stance Minnesota has taken. We continue to have among the lowest incarceration rates and the highest community supervision rates in the country. Reports indicate that up to 87% of those under correctional control are under community supervision and not incarcerated. Reports also indicate our state is doing a poor job at supervision, whereby nearly 60% of prison admissions are the result of supervision failures. Yet the MRRA, when implemented, will further reduce the length of time our Department of Corrections has to engage offenders in proper rehabilitation efforts. The current statute only excludes those inmates serving life sentences or some other examples like older sentences executed before 1980, for example. This bill adds an appropriate number of violent crimes to the list of exceptions. Many of these crimes, such as using a firearm in the commission of a crime or failing to register as a predatory offender, are among the crimes with the highest rates of downward departures from our sentencing guidelines. To then provide these offenders with even less time to serve through the earned incentive release credit undermines the value that a consequential criminal justice system provides. I urge you to vote yes on House File 533.
Thank you. I believe we have one more testifier, Mr. Bonnicky. As he's making his way up committee, I'd just like to point out, I was remiss, there were about 4 or 5 letters of opposition to the previous bill, and we've got 1 for and one letter against that are on this bill that are included in the packets. If you have any questions. Please state your full name and begin your testifier.
Yeah, thank you. My name is David Banky. I'm from the Minnesota Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee. I would just say thank to the representative for thinking about public safety. But if people haven't committed serious violence, why are they in prison? And that's also, if people are so worried about soft on crime and are not behaving, why do we have one of the lowest staff assault rates in the country? So I think some of the core points that have been made are simply false and are not helpful. To go further, we need your hard work to create safety in our state. We need the savings from your work to go to victims and preventing future victims. This is what the MRA does, and we need your support in making it work and not undermining it. If you exclude so many people from something, people will not participate or have an incentive, and we will not have a culture of rehabilitation that everyone's been speaking to its importance. So don't restrict access to the MRA, ensure access. You've already excluded the people with the lowest recidivism rates in our prisons. Plus, if you look at the recent DOC policies, it appears that up to 60% of people with short, mostly nonviolent sentences will not be able to access the MRA under current policy, nor are thousands of people who've already done everything they can do because they did not have access to programming that they did not have access to programming. Will you ask why that is going on? Furthermore, between 2019 and 2023, 15% of people with a sex crime treatment mandate were unable to complete that program prior to release. Are you going to help us with programming shortages? If programming is important, where is the support from this body to make that happen? Here's a few suggestions that you could be really useful with and we would love to see, I think would be in alignment with trying to have this bill result in more safety. 1, we need your support to make the retroactive MRA policy applied to everyone who's done what they can. This is how we free up programming bed space. This is how we build buy-in and culture in the facilities. This is how we get more money to crime victims and for future programming. This is how we make staff safer. And this is how we make the 17,000 families who've been waiting for so damn long for this bill to actually have results. Second, college success is highly tied with low recidivism rates. With Pell Grant Restoration and NSP, everyone in Minnesota's prisons should be able to access college for free through existing funding structures. Can we help make that happen? Third, why are we sending people to prison for such short sentences that they don't qualify for the MRA? Why is someone being sent to prison for less than 365 days, which is a huge percentage of admissions, as was mentioned? If we make that change, we free up money and resources and beds and programming. Even better, why don't you consider not sending nonviolent people to prison at all, like they do in California, which would suddenly mean that our current programming levels would go from being completely inadequate to being excellent. And that would allow also significant savings for the things that you all need in your districts to prevent crime, like housing, treatment, mental health support. These are the ways that we create safety in our state, just like supporting the MRA. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'm open to any and all questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, discussion. Representative Pinto.
Okay, thank you, sir. Wasn't sure if any, thank you, Chair. Wasn't sure if anybody else was going to go. So, Representative Bliss, one question is the eligibility or ineligibility for the earned incentive release credit. There's the 3 that are listed in the statute that are crossed out in your bill, but are you aware of the other ineligibility criteria that have been established in rules?
I am aware
Representative-
of the original language.
Representative Bliss.
I'm sorry.
That's
I'm aware of the original language of the statute. I'm not aware of the rules. Rules can be changed on the fly.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's, I don't know if I quite agree with you on the fly, because actually the rulemaking process, I think many of us are aware, takes a long time, but I understand your point. So I guess I just want to make sure to point out to you, because this might cause you to withdraw your bill, I'm not sure, but there are provisions in the rules right now where folks have been identified as being at high risk. There's sort of a review initially in the earned incentive release credit process. And if people are identified as being at high risk of not being able to participate successfully or various other ways, they're excluded for the program. And then also those placed on intensive supervised release when they're going to be released are also ineligible. So I do think that some of the folks, many of the folks in your bill that you may be most concerned about are actually already ineligible. Does that change your view at all? Representative Bliss, just to start.
Representative Bliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Pinto, no, it really doesn't. If you read the language of the bill or the statute, which is what we're here to discuss, it does not, I mean, it says that it's going to go through a review process, but it doesn't necessarily break out the violent crimes. Let me ask you, would you be good with the rapists being released from prison? One of the problems I have with what we have right now is the downward departure of the crime. So, and that's a prosecutor's discretion and a judge's discretion. So if the prosecutor, and this was brought to my attention by my county attorney in Beltrami County, he sought me out last year after this law passed, and he said, we're already downward departing to get people through the court system, and if we do this with these violent crimes, let's say they got a 10-year sentence where they normally would have gotten a 20-year sentence, now they're going to get a 5-year sentence. That's his concern. And when you make it retroactive, you're already taking into account the diminished sentence that was already negotiated.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Bush, thank you for the question that you asked. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
And the question you asked, you said, am I okay with a rapist being released from prison? And Representative Bush, based on your bill, you're okay with that because, in fact, anybody who's serving a life sentence is already ineligible. So what your bill is, you're taking people who will be released from prison, including rapists, and so they're already being released from prison. Your bill does nothing to change that. What your bill does is it simply says that folks who are going to be getting out of prison under your bill do not have the incentive, there's nothing in there that will encourage them to have the programming so that when they get out of prison, which they will under your bill, to make sure that they have an increased likelihood of success. So that's what's going on in your bill, is that people are getting out of prison. And the question is there incentive for them to do better when they get out, or is there not an incentive? Because either way, they are getting out. If you want to have a bill that they have a life sentence, that would be a different bill, but that is not your bill. And what I would like to make sure that I note, Representative Bliss, in the course of this, is that because we have people right now who are identified as being high risk and are ineligible, who go on intensive supervised release and are ineligible, then what we're talking about is people who are excluded under those things who are going to get out already and in fact are not going to be eligible to participate in this at all. So I have that concern. I'll maybe pause for a second. I have one other question, but I'd like to allow you the chance to respond since you'd asked me a question. Mr. Chair, if you're okay with that.
Well, I'll say to that, I think everyone in the committee acknowledges the fact that except for a life sentence, people will be getting out. I don't believe currently that we're withholding treatment, without the MRRA program being there. Not to take your wind away, Mr. Representative Blitz, but go ahead.
Well, again, the concern that was brought up to me by my county attorney is the retroactivity of this. Where the judge and the attorneys have already agreed to a downward departure or got a sentence that they thought was good enough to be a punishment for the crime and allow for release. And what we're doing is we're going back and cutting that sentence in half on violent criminals.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, and that's a good point. I had forgotten. I know I had something in my head from what you'd said before. So again, your bill does not change that outdate. So if somebody gets a downward durational departure, meaning they're getting out of prison shorter than that sentencing guideline said they would, your bill does nothing to that. It simply means that when they get out somewhat earlier, they don't have the incentive that's taken place in this. And I guess I'll just move to one final point and question, Mr. Chair. So Clause 10 jumped out at me. This is lines 2.16 to 2.17. This would exclude those who have used deadly force against a peace officer. And my question is, would this exclude, so if somebody, will those who were convicted of using violence against police officers on January 6th of the U.S. Capitol, would this exclude them from participation? I mean, so if we hadn't had the pardon by President Trump, would they be eligible for this, those who use violence against police officers? Representative Bliss.
Representative Bliss, would you like to answer the political question for the day?
Here we go with the Trump deflection syndrome. You know what? That's a federal crime. I'm not going to even entertain an answer to that, so thank you.
Representative Ingen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fair enough. I guess Representative Bliss will simply have an acknowledgement here that you have some concern about use of deadly force against a police officer, and I'd like to make sure that that's something that is consistent throughout. So, Mr. Chair, thank you. And Representative Bliss, thank you for the exchange.
I'd like to also add, Representative Pinto, that the bill also applies to assaults on the things that you referenced, peace officers, prosecutors, judges, or correctional employees. Representative Ingen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Bliss. I believe Representative Pinto had a list, the rulemaking authority for recommended offenses that are ineligible for early release. If he could share that with the committee, that'd be extremely beneficial, because then we could add to the list of ineligible MRRA crimes, and we can discuss an amendment to ensure that they're also subject to intensive post-release supervision. So just wanted to request that from him.
Did you wish to address that, Representative Bliss?
And Mr. Chair, I'll just note, I think it's not.
Representative Pinto, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that it's not specific offenses, and instead it's a series of categories, and there are a number of them. And I think it may well make sense to talk with the DOC to find out whether perhaps we do want to add those to the statute rather than rules. I will say it's challenging to change things in rules, but if they've been useful, for example, those who have less than 365 days to serve in prison, that would probably make sense, right? They'll be out relatively soon, and that's something that's in there in rules. Maybe that's something that we should add in statute. Certainly a conversation.
Lead Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess on sort of that conversation that just took place, I think it would be helpful if the commissioner could just tell us again what the rules say about eligibility. And there's also been some things thrown out there about how much time people will receive under MRRA, and I'd like some clarity around that from the commissioner as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Lead Mueller, I think first and foremost, as we think about this, right now today, prior to MRA, it matters not one iota whether somebody does well or not in prison. They are going to get out at 67%, 2/3 of the executed sentence. What MRA intends to do is provide that incentive for earlier release potential, earning, again, go back to earning, when they have done the requisite programs and participated in services and demonstrated the behavior necessary, they could be released as early as 50% of the executed sentence, thereby saving a potential realizing a 17% reduction in that sentence. But again, must be earned, first and foremost. So again, I just want to be clear that it's, they're not getting out at 50%. It really is about the fact that they have to earn them, and in today's world, people get out at 2/3. So we're really talking about that difference. As it relates to eligibility, there are eligibility requirements that were established, and many of them have been pointed out here. Those with life sentences and some of those under the older sentences that are ineligible. In addition to that, MRA did not apply to people whose sentence was less than 365 days. That was in statute and law. And that simply was a reality that was reflected of the fact that it becomes very difficult to do the comprehensive assessment and get people into the level of programming necessary and allow them the opportunity to both earn and demonstrate behavioral change inside the facility to grant early release. So just to be clear, those are statutory. As a matter of policy and internal rule, we have created those things about people who are very high risk, people who are subject to intensive supervised release supervision. And let me be clear, there are people in the community that were not happy about those exclusions, but it really was based upon the fact that we want to see people reduce their levels of risk inside, and the way that gets done is through participation and completion of programs and demonstration of pro-social behavior. So that's really how people go about earning early release, and the exclusions were really, I think, an effort to have our policy reflect the fact that we don't want to be releasing people that are very high risk to reoffend back into the community. We want people to engage in the types of programs and services that are going to reduce those risks.
Thank you, Commissioner Schnell. Lead Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just think it's interesting that we're relitigating this bill that we heard last year. I honestly don't really know why. I think that the rulemaking that's been put into place, the policy that's put into place, it's had a lot of input. And I'm really looking forward to how this is implemented. And as the commissioner said in the other bill, that's already having a positive impact on people who are incarcerated are already starting to get engaged with these, because the reality is these people are going to get out of prison. And, I know you laughed about the January 6ers, but they not only didn't serve their time, they didn't have the chance to be rehabilitated. And so what I really like about this, again, you're laughing, I don't think it's funny. The people here will have the opportunity to have that rehabilitation so that when they go out into the community, they'll be productive members of society. Thank you.
Representative Bliss, closing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll reserve my comments on the TDS that they're suffering, and just go into, all we're saying is these violent crimes, and you can look them up, they're violent and horrific crimes. Mutilation of a person while you're raping them, those are eligible. And again, maybe the rulemaking is sufficient now, but rules can be changed, legislation cannot. Easily, it has to come through us. And yes, it was litigated last year, and I was not part of this committee, but I would assume that there wasn't much input from the Republicans on this. So it is our turn to maybe make a few comments and changes. And in 2021, the bill that was presented, the first version, didn't have these crimes associated with the early release. So we're just asking simply to go back to what it was in 2021 and take some common sense. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, House File 533 is laid over. Thank you, Chair Bliss. Last bill on our agenda is House File 435. Chair Franson, please come to the testifier table with your testifier. And once again, there were testimonial letters that were submitted that are part of your packet. You can review those as Representative Franson or Chair Franson is making her way to the table. And Ms. Beckman, you'll be next up if you could approach the table too. Chair Franson, since you're not a member of the committee, I will move House File 435 before the committee. We have not received a fiscal note on the bill yet, so we'll be laying it over. Chair Franson, I believe you have an amendment
Yes.
coded 435A2. Please explain your amendment.
The amendment, for clarity reasons, explains what a woman is. So there's no confusion.
Looking for the amendment. Stand by.
And Mr. Chair,
I'm looking for the language. Stand by. Wait, I found it. Thank you. I will move the A2 amendment on your behalf. All in favor of, we have discussion on A2 amendment. Who is first?
Mr. Chair, I don't think that I have a copy.
Representative Tapke, is that you?
Yes.
It's on the very bottom. It looks like this. I also struggled to find it.
Oh, found it. Thank you, sir.
Did you have a question, Representative Tapke? Nope. Representative Franson, this is an author's amendment. I will move the amendment. All in favor of the amendments, Representative Greenman. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Franson, I am just wondering where, in writing this amendment, where this language defining female came from. Who'd you write it with?
Chair
well, this is,
Franson.
thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the same language that Representative Scott used on her bill, so it would just make things clearer for the entire body.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed when we were doing some background on this that it's the exact same definition, almost word for word, from the Heritage Foundation's model legislation, the Heritage Foundation that wrote and authored Project 2025. This appears to be the same pretty extreme language that we're seeing all over the country being brought into places to state legislatures. We're also seeing it at the federal level. It is not language that I think looks like the conversations we've been having here in Minnesota. It looks like it's being exported by what's happening with the Trump administration. You can laugh, but I think it's not, as we know, it was very unpopular in the conversation. So I would just say, members, it is an important piece of information as we look at this definition to know that this is being imported, I guess you'd say, into our conversation. And I am going to vote no.
Didn't hear a question in there. Representative or Chair Franson, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, before I do respond, members, I do apologize. I had snacks. I baked cookies on Sunday. They are in my car. And because the cookies did not turn out so well, I also brought chocolate-covered pretzels for you guys, so we'll just deliver those on your next committee hearing, okay? I really am apologetic. Okay.
Could we
Back
make
to
sure,
the-
I'd like to confirm that Representative Steer heard that.
I heard it. Thank you.
Okay, yes. I saw some head shaking. I
Thank
know
you.
they'll
You're
hold me
responding to the
accountable.
question.
Thank you. To the question, members, I think we're going to hear a lot about Project 2025 and Trump and Elon Musk and billionaires and people writing bills for us. Members, this disturbing language, or however the amendment was described, for the public, on lines 1.5, I think this is the main part of what the representative is opposed to. But starting at lines 1.5, it says, for the purposes of this section, female means a female as biologically determined by genetics and defined with respect to an individual's reproductive system. A female is defined as an individual who naturally has had or will have or would have, but for a congenital anomaly or intentional or unintentional disruption, the reproductive system that at some point produces, transports, and utilizes eggs for fertilization. A woman is an adult human female. A girl is a minor human female. Sadly, we have to put these things into statute because there's a lot of confusion of what a woman is these days, and that's why I would like to have the amendment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Representative Coran.
Thank you, Chair. I find it interesting that there's so much confusion about trying to figure out which gender somebody has, and we're asking questions like, what are you, instead of who are you? First, on its face, I find that really disturbing. I also think it's pretty telling that so many folks are confused about biology and what it means, through the course of DNA, how people develop as humans. I think we can bring this back to the average, understanding and education level across this country, that most adults don't have a basic understanding above an 8th grade level. And I think that's what's in this amendment here, is a severe lack of education directly in this language that clearly shows the lack of understanding of science. And so, on its face, this is not scientific. This is completely, it's dehumanizing for every person, because not every person will produce, transport, or utilize eggs for fertilization, or sperm, if we wanted to go that far, right? People are much more complex than the binary. Science supports that. People in our neighborhoods support that. I'm getting so many emails about, trying to stay away from this very definition because of so many difficulties that people have faced, because their biology does not fit into these 2 buckets that you're proposing on this sheet. And those 2 buckets that you're proposing are based on a woefully inadequate education. And so I would highly recommend that folks who are introducing amendments or bills that have anything to do with biology or genetics actually have a sound foundation of genetics in the conversation. I know in another committee, somebody attempted to bring a geneticist who went back to creationism as her science that was relied upon. And we're not talking about creationism. We're not talking about who is sort of by divinity supposed to follow one path or another. We're talking about human beings and how human beings develop. This is complex. It is way more complex than the binary. This should be offensive to every single person.
Chair Franzen, would you like to respond?
Mr. Chair, sometimes it's best just to let people talk.
All right. Is there any other questions on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
No.
Amendment carries. Chair Franzen, as to your Bill 435 as amended, please begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. I'm not going to belabor the point. This is really just a common sense bill. This is about protecting women. This is a women's rights bill. This is a human rights issue for women. This would require the Commissioner of Corrections to only house biological females at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee. Requires the Commissioner to transfer any non-biological females housed at Shakopee to another prison within 7 days of enactment of the proposed law. Mr. Chair, we do have testifiers both for and against this bill, and so I'm ready to proceed when you are.
Please call your testifier up. I believe it's Ms. Beckman. Please state your full name for the record and begin when you get situated.
My name is Alicia Beckman. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Alicia Beckman, and I worked for the Department of Corrections as a GED teacher beginning the fall of 2013 at Lino Lakes and transferred to Shakopee, where I remained for just shy of 10 years. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, a master's degree in education, and I'm a licensed teacher in the state of Minnesota. In June of 2023, unbeknownst to myself, frontline staff, and roughly 600 female offenders, Christina Craig Lusk, a biological male, was transferred to Shakopee Correctional Facility after he successfully won a lawsuit against the Department of Corrections. This decision, supported by the Commissioner, opened the floodgates for the nightmare that was to follow. Multiple incarcerated men were able to manipulate the system and transfer to Shakopee thanks to an ambiguous policy riddled with loopholes that allowed the transfer of these biological males. The men who ultimately transferred to Shakopee included at least 2 sex offenders and 1 murderer with a violent history during his incarceration over the past 30 years. At no point were the staff of Shakopee given a voice. We were handed the policy and given a directive to follow it. The only training received had to do with definitions and vocabulary as it related to gender and sex. Upon voicing my concerns via chain of command regarding this new policy, I was simply told I needed to follow it. It was clear that there was no fighting this from inside. Each day, the women of Shakopee must face their fears and subject themselves to re-traumatization and re-victimization by having biological males housed within close proximity to them. Each day they wonder, will my co-defendant or ex try to transfer here? Will the man who sexually exploited me through prostitution try to transfer here next? A large percentage of incarcerated women have been victims of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse at some point in their lives. So putting violent sex offenders within close quarters to them seems punitive and counterproductive. At no point were the roughly 600 women of Shakopee given a voice in this matter. Instead, the voice of 1 trumped theirs. The purpose of incarceration is twofold: for punishment and to keep society safe. Once incarcerated, the Department of Corrections has an obligation to provide a safe incarceration. Putting the request of one offender's needs or desires above all others seems to negate the safety component. Roughly 90% of incarcerated individuals will be released back into society after completing their prison term. Subjecting these women to being housed with biological males is not conducive to their healing, recovery, and overall preparation to be successful upon release. For years, gender responsiveness was the big push at Shakopee. We were repeatedly taught and trained that women are different than men, and therefore we need to respond to them according to their gender, not their believed gender. Evidence-based practices that are in place at Shakopee were written for women, not men. The Department of Corrections has taken the stance that they have an obligation to provide medical treatment to include gender dysphoria. However, transferring men to a women's prison has nothing to do with medical treatment. The DOC also claims that decisions around facility placement undergo a robust and thorough review by a multidisciplinary review committee. However, the men we have seen come through the doors of Shakopee are there for one reason: to manipulate the system. It should come as no surprise that one man has already been transferred back to a men's facility and is now incarcerated at Stillwater. So much for a robust and thorough review. An administrator within the DOC made claim back in September after my Alpha News interview that there have been no reported instances of violence or threats. This is simply not true. I've spoken to several correctional officers that have filed reports on behalf of women who have been harassed, flashed, intimidated, and overall live in fear of their safety. One incarcerated woman was brave enough to step forward to share her story with Alpha News, and it spoke volumes. I think it's also worth noting that many women have not come forward due to fear of retaliation or losing privileges like early release. Staff have also remained silent due to fear of retaliation. The only reason I am able to speak today is I made the extremely hard decision to walk away from a career I loved and excelled at. I've been thanked and supported by dozens of staff for being their voice, as they can't walk away from their career. The day my students came to me in tears, not knowing what to do about their fear and concern about men being incarcerated at Shakopee, was the day I realized I could no longer help keep them safe. I knew my job would be in jeopardy had I spoken up while still employed. The environment at Shakopee shifted drastically in June of 2023 for staff and offenders and continues to be an issue today. Staff are being forced to ignore science, their morals, and to put their safety in jeopardy. Female officers are forced to do strip searches on biological males. Can you imagine what these officers have to face each day? In what world is this appropriate? This needs to stop before it gets any worse. Look at California's prison system. Women are being raped, impregnated, and assaulted by biological males. These men are taking advantage of an egregious policy, and the change needs to start today. Please stop this madness and help return Shakopee Correctional Facility to what it was intended for, a space for women only. We have a duty and obligation to them, not violent sexual predators looking for an easy incarceration, protective custody, an attempt at early release, and the opportunity to prey on vulnerable women. Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier will be a Devika Guy. Please state your full name and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Devika Ghai, and I'm here to speak in opposition to HF 435. As a taxpayer whose tax dollars fund Minnesota prisons and the time of this committee, I am really concerned and just confused as to why this committee is spending time trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Where is the evidence that housing trans women, which is clearly what this bill is trying to target, in women's facilities poses a risk to anyone? There is unfortunately copious evidence that trans women are targets of violence in men's facilities, which is why they are safer in women's facilities if they choose to be there. As elected officials, we expect you to act in accordance with, not in direct opposition to, current research and the statistical evidence, all of which point to housing trans women with all other women if that's where they are safest. We also expect you to consider the input of communities who are the most impacted by your legislation. Where are the currently or formerly incarcerated trans women who you consulted before writing this bill? It is irresponsible and unethical to take action that might endanger someone's personal safety without even hearing from them first. It is very clear to us, your constituents, that this bill is a flimsy attempt to scapegoat a minority group and to further a political agenda and a transphobic narrative that is being forwarded at the national level right now, and not a good faith attempt to solve any problems in our community. This is especially disturbing when there are so many more real and urgent public safety issues to address. If you're truly concerned about the women in Shakopee, please consider improving their access to healthcare, educational opportunities, job training, restorative justice, nutritious food, books, the internet, the list goes on. These are all services and essentials that they are either completely lacking or have highly restricted and limited access to. Please vote against this facially discriminatory bill and spend your time addressing real problems facing the women in Shakopee. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Lucy Geach, and then on deck will be Reverend Dr. Justin Sabia Tanis. Once again, please state your full name and begin your testimony.
Thanks so much. My name is Lucy Amelia Geach, and Chair, members of the Public Safety and Finance Commission. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today. HF 435 is a discriminatory and pernicious bill. The rigid hyper-scrutiny espoused by this bill catalyzes discussion around the bodies of incarcerated trans people in a way that I am already deeply familiar with. As the auntie of a niece, the sister to a sister, and the daughter to a mother, I know deeply that our bodies as women have been scrutinized and castigated for generations. I'm here because I care about the safety of women, of all women, of women serving in the military, of immigrant women, of trans women, of grandmothers, stay-at-home moms, and women working in government. I'm here because I consider trans women to be my sisters, and I do not want to see any of my sisters being forced into men's prisons. HF 435 is a harmful bill, which not only contradicts the 13-year guidance of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, but also plays into the pervasive national narrative that incarcerated trans people are somehow a threat to our democracy. Make no mistake, this narrative is designed to distract, divide, and dehumanize while scapegoating some of the most vulnerable members of our society. And yeah, let's be real, there are issues with our correctional and justice systems. For instance, inmates not having access to safe water or facilities needing repairs. Respectfully, it's my opinion that this commission should focus on those issues and set HF 435 aside for good. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Reverend Dr. Justin Sabia Tanis, and on deck, Jess Braverman. Please state your name again for the record and begin your testimony.
I am Reverend Dr. Justin Sabiatanis. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I come here as a pastor and a seminary professor in Christian ethics. For many years, I've studied violence and discrimination experienced by the transgender community. Based on that knowledge, I am deeply opposed to this bill. Multiple studies confirm that between 20 to almost 60% of incarcerated transgender people experience sexual and physical assault from fellow inmates and prison staff, a rate 5 to 9 times that of non-transgender inmates. Transgender people, especially women of color, are the victims of these assaults, not the perpetrators. Violence and rape lead to lasting trauma and expose people to diseases, including HIV. The courts have been clear that subjecting people to assault, rape, and disease is not an acceptable consequence of incarceration. Moreover, it is immoral to knowingly expose prisoners to these dangers, which is precisely what this bill would do. One respondent to a study I co-authored commented, quote, "I was arrested one day regarding something minor. Due to my gender being marked as male, I was put in with the men. Within 15 minutes, I was raped by 3 different men. My mother even called and warned the officers not to put me in with the general population as I would be an easy target. When I got out, I tried to seek help from victim services, but was denied." End quote. This is precisely the type of harm that results from prioritizing biology at birth alone when it comes to determining inmate placement. I am well aware it is popular right now to target transgender people. Yet one of your responsibilities as lawmakers is to ensure that society does not follow mob rule, but protects those who are in the minority. Because the right to live our own lives according to our conscience is part of what it means to be free people. Transgender people share that right along with every other Minnesotan. To deliberately subject transgender women to additional and unnecessary suffering diminishes the moral standing of our state. It is an ethical violation that serves no purpose. I urge you to vote against this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jess Braverman. Please state your name and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Jess Braverman, and I'm the legal director at Gender Justice. It's really hard to sit here and listen to people misgender my client, Christina Lusk, repeatedly without anyone stepping in to stop it. It's wrong, it's disrespectful, and I can't believe I'm sitting here listening to this. In my career, I've represented thousands of people who have crossed paths with the criminal legal system as victims and perpetrators, many in both capacities. 6 of those years I spent representing kids in one of the busiest family courts in the country. So I'm glad that we're here talking about the issue of safety in government institutions like prisons and jails. However, I want to give you information about how HF 435 subverts the goals of safety and makes those institutions less safe, and also why this bill is unlawful. Forcing transgender women into men's facilities is dangerous for people both inside and outside of prison. First, it is dangerous for the incarcerated transgender women themselves, who are subject to sexual abuse, violence, harassment, and increased risk of suicide and self-harm in male facilities. This bill is also dangerous for transgender women who are victims of crimes. The LGBTQIA community has had to come together far too many times to mourn the loss of transgender women due to violence and hate. What the government wants is for victims of crime to trust the police, but there could be no trust when the system itself endangers, misgenders, and disregards the humanity and safety of transgender women. This bill does not increase safety for incarcerated people, and it does not increase safety for crime victims. It signals that the government does not care about the safety and well-being of transgender people. It puts a target on the back of transgender women, both inside and outside of government institutions. This bill is also illegal. On January 20th, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order directing the Federal Bureau of Prisons to house all transgender women in men's facilities. Over a dozen transgender people have gone to court to oppose the order and have successfully avoided being forcibly moved into men's facilities. Judge Lamberth, a Reagan appointee, said that this law is likely to violate the rights of these women to be free from cruel and unusual punishment. These lawsuits are ongoing, but so far transgender women have universally been successful because policies like these are dangerous and they violate the Constitution. This bill also violates the Minnesota Constitution's promise of equal protections for transgender people and the Minnesota Constitution's prohibition on cruel or unusual punishment, as well as the Minnesota Human Rights Act. That's why my organization was successful in our lawsuit challenging DOC's policies, forcing transgender women into men's facilities, because that policy was unconstitutional. Violence and sexual assault are real problems in prison. They need to be addressed with real solutions. HF 435 is not a solution. It's a blueprint for increasing violence both inside and outside of government institutions. No one is safer when the government dehumanizes its own citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all we have for the testifier list. I'd like to reflect that in 5 years in the legislature, that's the first time I've ever seen all of the testifiers hit the time limit without even being said. So thank you for that. I'm going to take a little chair prerogative and ask the first question. Representative Franzen, I've read the bill multiple times and I keep reading it here. And if anybody has any questions about what the language of the bill is, at any point in the bill, it looks to me like why line 1.9 says that Shakopee prison is only for the biological females with the language as you added with your amendment. Did you intend for your bill to force the transgender inmates that are currently in Shakopee that we're looking at excluding back into a men's prison? The bill only says that biological males, according to your description, can't be in the Shakopee prison. Does your bill intend to force them back into a male prison?
Mr. Chair, so my bill is to protect biological women from men being in their prison space.
Thank you. Tabke, Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have some questions for Commissioner Schnell.
Chair Franzen. Yep, I got it.
I have some questions for Commissioner Schnell.
Oh, for Commissioner Snell, sorry. I was getting names written down. Commissioner Snell, state your full name again and begin your test, or add the Representative Tabke, go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And before we get started on this, I just want to reiterate what the final testifier said. Is it, I feel bad and frustrated, and so I apologize for not stopping as well the misgendering that's been happening by Chair Franzen and the first testifier. It should not have happened, and I apologize for that. And this is a really difficult issue. I represent Shakopee and where the Shakopee Correctional Facility is, and everyone in the facility is a constituent of mine, and including everyone who's in there. And so from there, I'd like to get some clarity around what exactly is happening, and not hyperbolic national themes of hating on transgender folks, but like actual reality of what and why things are happening. So Commissioner Schnell, is, as we heard in the testimony, like, could you give us, I don't even know where to start exactly with all the problems that came up with the first testifier specifically, but there were many things that I just feel were wrong and not what I know of fact of what's happening and why transgender women are in the facility and how that process happened. So can you let the committee know as to exactly how that process played out and why it happened in the way that it did?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative Tabke, again, Paul Schnell, the Commissioner at the Department of Corrections, for the record. You know, I think the policy, as the last testifier spoke to, both in Minnesota and I think in departments of corrections around the country, there has been many challenges, and I think issues of systems not reflecting and addressing the safety issues that are represented for transgender people, I think as was stated, both in the community and certainly in the carceral settings. And over the course of time, as a result of learning, in some cases hard lessons due to legal challenges that we in Minnesota faced, as well as systems around the country. Policies are changed and shifted. So today, what would happen is that when a person identifies as transgender in the system and brings that forward, there is a process for the system to review their requests. And that request can run the gamut, everything from responsive transgender medical care to placement in a facility that is reflective of their gender. And in this case, what happens in our agency as a result of the lawsuit that was settled was the development of a far more comprehensive and robust policy that we use today. And that ultimately results in an evaluation of people who are in our system. And it is a process that is bidirectional. In other words, we may have transgender men who are considered for placement in men's facility and transgender women who are reviewed for placement in women's facility. We assess the risk of both physical and sexual harm, and that is the broadest range of risk because, as was pointed out, and as is certainly the case, we know that transgender people in general do face really unprecedented safety challenges in the community as well, and perhaps in particular in the carceral setting. So what ends up happening is when they're identified, they are assessed and reviewed by both our behavioral health and medical staff, and ultimately there is a review of the requested service or placement that considers and evaluates 9 separate factors. And that is really, those factors are pretty comprehensive, and that includes things like perpetration of physical and sexual assault, programming needs, gender expression, the assigned security levels, and certainly the individual's own views with respect to their own safety, which must be given serious and quantifiable consideration. So on the basis of that, a particularly trained agency gender identity committee makes a recommendation to the deputy commissioner, and the deputy commissioner then, in consultation with the commissioner, makes a decision about placement in a facility. Medical decisions are made by appropriately trained and qualified medical personnel with regard to providing responsive medical care to transgender individuals. But that's at the highest level kind of what the process looks like.
Representative Tacky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that explanation, Commissioner. So when this all came forward, and I do agree with Chair Franzen that there are absolutely concerns and discussions that should happen as this process is moving forward. And I have heard from inmates in Shakopee that they wish that there had been a different process for transgender women coming into the facility. And so from there, can you talk about why that happened the way it did in the federal government's requirements on how that process worked?
Commissioner Snell, but let's keep this to the state matters, please.
Yeah, so, Mr. Chair, Representative Tabke, I think what ended up happening was when the settlement was reached relative to the lawsuit, the objective was to make that placement in as soon a time frame as possible. But I want to be really clear about something, that what happens in prisons, and I think you have to understand the context here, what happens in prisons is that every single day, regardless of whether we're talking about trans people or not, there is a lot of different issues that have to be managed inside prison settings, a host of them. How do you manage people who may have a victim family member in that same facility? What about security threat groups or gangs? There's just a range every single day that DOC staff are dealing with issues around safety. And so the objective and the goal is really to manage safety in the broadest sense. It's not a perfect science. There is no such thing as a perfect science when we're dealing with human beings. But what we end up doing is managing safety to the fullest extent possible. Now, would it have been nice to I think, have a long runway and to prep people? Yes, and there's no doubt about that. And I think, we've learned from our own mistakes here along the way. These have been, as I mentioned, challenging not just for Minnesota, but really across the entire country. And yet, I think what's clearly happening and where the courts have landed generally, and certainly where medicine has landed, is that it is critical that departments of corrections provide responsive gender care.
Representative Tabke.
Thank you much, Chair Novotny. So I just have two very quick, short questions here. I just want to make sure that we're all understanding the fact that this has been a deliberate process that has been done within the law as best as we can possibly do it, dealing with a whole variety of factors that are coming into this. So how many folks are there within the correctional facilities across the state of Minnesota?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, just want to clarify, you're talking about the number of people in the system altogether? About 8,300.
And Mr. Chair, I got one.
You said that last time.
No, I said two quick questions is what I said.
Representative Tabke.
And then Commissioner Chanel, how many transgender people do we have within the system as well?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative Tapke, 49 people have identified this is system-wide as transgender male or transgender female.
Thank you.
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are also for Commissioner Schnell, so don't leave yet. So I think it was the testifier, Jess Braverman, who brought forth the court decision, I believe it was from the DC District Court, around the constitutionality of the executive order that came forward from Trump. And so my question is, if this bill were to pass into law, do you anticipate a lawsuit coming forward?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I think, relative to the executive order itself, which doesn't apply to us, obviously, but I think I would expect that we would face a constitutional challenge.
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Schnell. And for people who are listening, can you explain when there is a constitutional challenge to a law that is passed, it's not us as legislators who make the laws that are responsible for going to court on that. Can you, who would be responsible? Who would be, going to court on this issue?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, it would be the Attorney General's office on behalf of the Department of Corrections who would be defending that.
Representative Franson would like to get in. Representative Franson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I believe that over the last 2 years, and I bet Representative Hudson would be able to explain, as well as Representative Engen, but there were quite a few bills that were brought forward to the House floor over the last 2 years that Republicans also raised constitutional issues with that. And I just want to say that it's done on both sides of the party. So it's not just today we're finding out something we should not be doing. This has been done over the years, and we are having a conversation today, which is why this bill is forward. Thank you.
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep, fair point. Fair point. Representative Franson, I agree. I know I got some of my bills challenged in that same way. There may be one in court right now. But I would like to point out that when we do this, it is taxpayer dollars that is going to defending these court cases. It's not our money as legislators making however little we make every year, but it is taxpayer dollars going to fund those lawsuits. And so you know, while I object to this this bill on a personal level and a values level and a moral level, because trans people are my brothers and sisters and I love them and they are part of my community, I also object to this for fiscal responsibility purposes, that this is almost certainly going to this is almost certainly going to end up in court being challenged. And it is almost certainly that we are going to lose because a Reagan appointee judge in DC already said that this is unconstitutional. And if a Reagan appointee judge in DC says it's unconstitutional, the chances that our judicial system is going to say that it's okay are extremely slim. And realistically, I think a lawsuit is the best possible scenario in this situation, because the alternative is the fact that transgender women are 13 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than cisgendered men. And that is a reality that we need to face. When we are talking about the health and safety of prisoners in our system in Minnesota, it is not okay for us to ignore a segment of the population just because we don't like them. It is imperative, and it is our responsibility and duty here as legislators to make the best possible decisions for the people that we are taking into custody and that we are responsible for. And so for that reason, I am opposed to the bill. But thank you very much, both of you, for answering questions.
Thank you. I'll jump in with a question quick for Commissioner Snell. I'll go back to the back in the day portion of my life. I've served lawsuits to prisoners at St. Cloud that had sexually assaulted other prisoners. And I noticed when I read those lawsuits as I served the offenders that they were named as a subject, but the second person named in the lawsuit was also the state of Minnesota. Has something changed, or if there's a sexual assault by any person that's in this prison, does the state of Minnesota get sued over that also, Commissioner Snell?
Mr. Chair, yes, I am regularly subjected to and served with lawsuits on behalf of the state for a host of legal challenges.
Thank you, Commissioner Snell. So I guess the question is, what do you want to be sued over? Representative Whitty, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair Novotny. You know, I think the crux of all of this is safety. I think, Commissioner, you're trying to do that. I think as we look at everyone involved, it's the safety piece of it. And I wish there would be more discussion in how this, I do think it was thrown right at you. But I think that's the part that was missing. And I appreciate all the testifiers' thoughts. You're hearing them from someone who's worked in the system, has served, to other groups, and I think those pieces are all relevant for us to hear. My question to you, Commissioner Schnell, is there any co-ed prisons throughout the United States?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative Whitty, not that I know of off the top of my head.
And then I would ask you,
Representative Whitty.
Commissioner Schnell, it would be very difficult to probably protect everybody in those settings, correct?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, you know, again, as I said earlier, we face a lot of challenges in prisons, and there's always challenges in terms of how do you protect people's safety.
Thank you. So I'll just end with this, and I appreciate you answering.
Representative Harder.
I don't think there's a perfect way, but we're trying to figure out what's the best way to keep everyone safe. Thank you.
Representative Harder.
Thank you, Chair Novotny. My question, I have a few for you, Commissioner Chanel. If you remember, we met a couple years ago at the Shakopee prison. And I got a tour and met 4 ladies, and they were all very nice. They were, all of them said basically that they were friends with the wrong people, right? And they made the wrong choices. So hopefully the 4 that I met there, at least 3 of them are on their way to hopefully turning their lives around. I am aware, the first testifier who talked about concerns from the employees, and I do know someone that does work for the facility and had relayed some of those same concerns. My first question, because we have men who believe that they're women going to Shakopee, but do we have women who feel that they are men? And if we do, where are they being transferred?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative Harder, yes, we do have trans women who are trans, have been transferred to men's facilities.
Commissioner, Representative Harder.
Did I
Can we clarify that, please?
I think, yeah, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Snell, clarify.
Misstated something. Yes, we have had trans men who have been transferred to men's facilities.
Representative Harder.
Thank you, Chair Navani. Okay, and that's going to lead to another question. I'm concerned about the safety of all these people, trans or non-trans, right? People tend to be not so nice, and it doesn't matter if you're trans or not. There are some people that just are not very nice people. So
Representative Harder, can you speak into the mic, please?
I do. I have a question. So I'm concerned about the safety of, I guess, the men and the women now, because it appears from what I'm reading is that they are compelled to share rooms, that they sleep together, and perhaps these showers. And I would like to know, from your standpoint with your department, what is in place to ensure safety of all these people, trans or not trans?
Commissioner Snell.
Chair, Representative Harder, I think, there is a host of things. There are things in policy relative to the management of showering, as a for instance, and even the placement and housing people, trans women with other women in the facility is all managed through either the facility or the agency gender identity committees. And safety is the #1 priority or focus of those committees. So this is all a managed process, much like we manage all safety factors within the correctional setting.
Representative Harder.
Thank you, Chair Novotny. So when I was at the Shakopee prison, I describe it as college-like. It's like being on a college campus. And the people are housed, if you don't know, I think they're referred to as pods. And I don't know if every facility is like that, because that's the only facility that I have been able to tour. So what we're hearing about safety for everybody, is there a reason why that perhaps people who identify as another gender, that maybe that they're in a pod by themselves? I mean, they would still be together with the general population, whatever that they're doing, working or whatever, but sleeping or showering, is there the opportunity that they could be doing this separately?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, if I'm understanding correctly, are you asking if it would be something that could be arranged to have like a trans unit within a facility? Is that, I guess I'm just trying to understand the question.
Representative Harder.
Thank you, Chair Novotny. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with this question. So we have people, and they're not comfortable, right, sleeping or showering with the transgender people, right? They're not comfortable. They have voiced those concerns. Are we addressing them in a way that makes these people feel comfortable? So, for example, if someone is housed in a room and they're not comfortable, does the department do something about that?
Commissioner Snell.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, we manage this, again, I think it's really important to understand the context of the prison setting, because I think these issues come up whether we're talking about transgender people or not, and managing all kinds of issues of concerns, incompatibilities, and those sorts of things. And, we don't have data or evidence that suggests that the placement of transgender people in a facility that matches their gender identity create or poses at any greater risk to anyone else. But we recognize that we have to manage all behaviors of all people. And that's what we do. And so, yes, if somebody brings forward a concern, it is our effort to address and manage that in an appropriate way. And there's a variety of different ways that can be done. Could be placement in different rooms. It could be individual room settings. It could be these things happen every day in our prisons all over the state.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Novani. If I may,
Thank you.
if I may just.
One more? Go ahead,
Just
Representative
one?
Harder.
Okay. I would be open, if you are, to come again to the Shakopee prison. I mean, I would like to meet some of these people and hear firsthand what they have to say, if that is at all possible. That probably wouldn't reflect anything that's going to be happen here, but the more information that I have, the better decisions that I can make for the prison system. I do have one other question, which I'm not going to ask right now, but before you leave, I want to ask you a question. And that's all that I have. Thank you, Chair.
And Representative Harder, you will have time because we are going to take a 15 roughly minute recess and reconvene at 5 o'clock in this room.